My name is Diane Call, and I welcome you as president of Queensborough Community College to our fall presidential lecture series. The series goes back to 2000, and we are very pleased because we have very distinguished folks who come to speak to our faculty, our students, our community, our staff. So it's kind of a very nice event. And in the fall, we always feature a very prominent member of the CUNY family, or certainly of higher education on a national level. And in the spring, we showcase one of our many, many talented faculty. It's always very hard to make that choice. But tonight, it's kind of an easy choice because we have a very special lecturer, Dr. William Helmbrecht. I want to thank our Presidential Lectures Committee. They're with us today. Dr. Sandra Palmer, Academic Affairs, Dr. David Humphreys, who's chair of the English department and a former presidential lecturer, past, I should say. Once you are, you're always, right? Dr. Paul Sedaris from our chemistry department, and Dr. Azi Ale, who's from the Department of Social Sciences, specializing in psychology. So I want to thank them because they've been part of a process to think about very interesting people we might host. So today, we're very pleased to welcome Dr. William Helmbrecht and his wife, Helene. Thank you, Helene, for being here. Helene is a speech pathologist, but she doesn't practice anymore, so I hope she's not critiquing me too much tonight. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Helmbrecht last June at the CUNY Board of Trustee meetings when he was confirmed as a CUNY Distinguished Professor. This is the penultimate in our City University of New York. Dr. Helmbrecht is a Distinguished Professor of Sociology at the City College of New York and the CUNY Graduate Center. I was very much impressed with his accomplishments in higher education. At CCNY, he's been a department chairperson. He serves in the Colin Powell School of Government and also at Yale. And I have some familiarity with Yale. I still have quarters to get me to park somewhere by the Yale campus, as a matter of fact. But Dr. Helmbrecht is also a very prolific author. He has authored 15 books. And the most recent is the one that really created him as a very well-known and popular author outside of the normal bounds of academia when he wrote The New York Nobody Knows. And I think it's amazing because he really explored New York City, block by block, on foot, which is kind of astounding. How many pair of shoes did you go through? 9. Wow, okay. Dr. Helmbrecht walked essentially 6,000 miles, 121,000 blocks in New York City. That's rather amazing. His goal was really to capture the heart and the soul of this great metropolis, the center of our universe in many respects. And he spoke with hundreds of people from all walks of life and of all different backgrounds, socioeconomic, et cetera. Tonight, he's going to focus on 2 great boroughs, our own borough of Queens. Let's hear it for Queens, please. There you go. And of course, the borough of Brooklyn. There you go, Brooklyn. Should have bought real estate there a while ago. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his experiences and his latest effort, which is a book. He's writing 5 of them, one about each borough, the first being published being Brooklyn, but he's promised that we'll all have a hand in some of the things he notes in his next book, which is certainly about Queens. So I think as an indication of how small this world really is, when I met Dr. Helmbrecht last June, it turns out that he taught a sociology class at Queensborough one summer many years ago, which is amazing. It's a small world, truly. He was also part of a team from Columbia Press that led to the green lighting, if you will, of a book by one of our faculty members, Dr. Trevor Milton, and his book, The Conman of New York City. Now, Trevor was our presidential lecturer last spring, so this is kind of a wonderful experience to have the conversation continued in bookend form, if you will. And so we're very excited to have Dr. Helmbrecht, and I hope you give him a very warm welcome.
Well, thank you very much, President Call, for such a wonderful introduction, which I really do appreciate. And yes, I have very warm feelings for Queensborough Community College. First of all, I live not far from here. I lived in Queens for 16 years and have always liked it. And therefore, I'm very, very delighted to be beginning the third book. I've written the Manhattan book that's going to come out next year, and I wrote the Brooklyn book 2 years ago, and that just came out now. And when I was, at that time when I was teaching here, I taught a class of nurses. It was in the social science division, and they happened to be nurses, and they were very serious students. They were good students. I had an entirely positive experience. My children swam in the pool here. They had a good time. And Queensborough is perhaps the finest of the two-year colleges. And we see evidence of that from the students. When we get students from Queensborough to City College, we know that they did well. We know that they know what they're doing. And again, it's really a delight to be here. So let me start by telling you about the book. When I was a kid, my father played a game with me. It was called Last Stop, which was that every weekend that he had free time, he and I would ride the subway from Manhattan, where I grew up on the Upper West Side. We'd ride the subway to the last stop, and then we would walk around the neighborhood. And that's how I learned about New York City. This was an inexpensive way to spend an afternoon, but it was also a very delightful way because when we ran out of last stops, we went to the second to last stop, then to the third to last stop, and it was always different because every stop was different. Just like in your own neighborhood, every block could be different if you grew up in New York City. Because one of the hallmarks of New York City is that it's very varied. In other words, you have one block is a good block, one block is a bad block. When gentrifiers talk to me in the city, let's say Brooklyn or the Bronx, for example, they'll tell me which block they avoid because it's not safe and which block they go on. And everybody has these routes that they take. So I would go to Throg's Neck in the Bronx, and there I learned that fish do not come from the fish store. I saw people fishing. I realized there was an earlier step in the process. When I was a kid and I went to the fish store on 104th Street and Amsterdam Avenue, the fish were in a tank. Now, it never occurred to me to think about where were they before they were in the tank. It looked to me like they were always in the tank. You have to understand, kids think of things differently, as you know from your own experience. I remember when my father went out, I was 3 years old. He went out to mail some letters, and we lived on 105th Street, and there was a mailbox across the street. And my father approached the mailbox, and he was going to put the letters in. I said, "Don't do that." He said, "Why?" I said, "There's someone who comes here every day and takes away everything." I don't know if he thought it was a savings account. I had no idea. I have no idea what I was thinking about, but that happened. And I remember going into the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn and on Utica Avenue. My father poked his head into a barn, and everybody fled to the back. I have no idea why. He did look a bit like a detective. So I really learned to appreciate and enjoy this great and wonderful city this way. We did this for about 4 or 5 years, and then that ended. I had no idea that I would write another 14 books and not even think about New York, except for the fact that for the last 40 years, I've been teaching a course on New York City. And as a result, you know, I'm familiar with the city. And as part of the class, when it's a PhD class, I take the students on walks every week to different neighborhoods. We spend 4 or 5 hours, then I treat them to a meal. It's usually an ethnic kind of meal, and they have a good time. It's really a nice and very, very pleasant experience. Now, my chair of my department at CUNY said, "You know, you've been teaching a course so long, why don't you write a book about it?" And then I discovered that no one who was in sociology had ever written a book about the entire city, much less walked it. I started out thinking I was going to walk 20 blocks and write about the 20 representative streets. But then I realized it was the the height of hubris, if you will, to think that you could pick 20 blocks in a city with 121,000 blocks and claim that they are representative of the entire city? That's ridiculous. Why does 58th Street rank above 57th, or 57th above 54th, or 54th below 51st? And so I realized reluctantly that I was going to have to do the entire city. And Princeton University Press, they were all behind that. After all, they didn't have to walk it. I was the one that was walking it. Now, how do you walk 6,048 miles? The city's really 6,163, I should tell you. But, you have to leave over something for next time. So I only did 6,048. But how do you do that? Well, it's like climbing a mountain. You do it one block at a time. And if you ever think about the end, you'll faint. You can't do it. But like this, 30 miles a week on the average, 120 a month, 1,500 a year, 4 times 1,500, you're at 6,000. It's nothing. Try it. It's a lot of fun. Believe me, I had a great time, and besides, it's good exercise. You have to be a little crazy to do this? Yes, you do. But on the other hand, the books did very well. I was very happy. When I interviewed Mayor Ed Koch, former Mayor Ed Koch, he said to me, "You must be the only guy to walk every block of the city and write a book about it." And I realized, yeah, he's right. By the way, I probably did the last interview with him. He was 88 years old, but I can tell you he was still pretty sharp, because as I left, he says, "Don't forget your jacket." I said, "Thank you, thank you." And I had a little thing with him, which was that I wanted to tape, I taped the interview, and I wanted to, get his signature on it, because I didn't have to do that with other people. The IRB gave me a pass, the Institutional Review Board gave me a pass on doing it with other people, because I wasn't asking them personal questions. All the people were over 18 years of age. But when you interview somebody like Koch, you want to get permission. He says to me, "I'm not giving you permission." I said, "Why?" He says, "Because you don't need permission." I said, "Why don't I need permission?" Well, because when you do an interview with a public figure, it's like a newspaper interview, you don't sign off on it. He says, "I'm not going to sign off." I said, "Nobody else gave me a hard time about this." He says, "Yeah, but they're not a lawyer. I'm a lawyer." I said, "Okay, I can see that." So I thought to myself, I gotta get his permission. Somehow he has to indicate that he is okay with what I said. So I hit upon the following stratagem, and this pretty much mirrors the whole book. Because when you're out there walking the streets, you don't have time to plan for things, and you have to think on your feet. I tell my students, elementary school rewards you for sitting in class with your hands folded, but college and life doesn't do that. Life rewards people who are creative. So I wrote him an email 2 hours later. I said, "Mayor Koch, I love the interview. I learned so much from it. I'm so happy. And now I'm going to write some excerpts from our interview that I'm going to use in the book. So I want to make sure that I have the information correct. So here's what I'm using in the book, and you're free to add anything else you want." And I sent it to him, and he said, "It's okay." That was my permission. That's all I needed. He said, "Oh, that's okay." Well, then that's okay, then that's fine. And fine for me. Now, people said to me, "Why did you have to walk every block in the city? Why couldn't you just walk a quarter of the blocks? It'd been a lot quicker, a lot easier." Well, the truth of the matter is that, first of all, every book has to have a hook. The hook is you walked every block in the city, and that sold a lot of books. But aside from that crass observation, let me just say that there are other benefits. If you walk every block, you see, you never know when you're doing your 4 or 5 hour walk when you're going to come upon that really interesting thing. It could come in the first 10 minutes, but it could come in the last 10 minutes. And so I didn't want to lose the opportunity. For example, on one day I was walking on 178th Street in Queens, and I said that we would focus on Queens and Brooklyn. I was walking on 178th Street, and there was this man standing on the porch, and he had a beautiful garden. So I said to him, because this is the way I did the interviews, it wasn't with a list of questions or anything, it was spontaneous, I never knew what I was going to ask, I never knew who I was going to meet. So I said to him, "That's a beautiful garden you have there. Where'd you get those beautiful flowers? What are those flowers all about?" Because I saw giant flowers, they were very beautifully colored. And he said to me, "Oh, these flowers all come from my home country, namely Guyana. And every day when I get up and I go to work at my hard job, I look at these flowers and they remind me of the beautiful homeland that I left behind." And when I think about that, that's what helps me get through the day. And I thought to myself, this particular comment speaks volumes about the whole process of immigration. You know, we tend to use statistics in sociology to talk about, or political science, any field like that, about immigration. But the truth of the matter is, immigration is about human beings. And unless you capture the story of the human beings, you really don't get anything. So this tells you about what people leave behind, the pathos of leaving your country behind and coming to a new country. And I really got an appreciation of the immigration process from his comments. But what would have been the case if I had said, you know, it's so hard to walk this whole city. I'm going to walk every second block. I'm going to walk 179th and 177th. Well, then I never would have met him on 178th. So that's what I mean by you have to walk every block. I'll give you another example about immigration parallel to this in Brooklyn. I walked through a neighborhood called Gowanus. And Gowanus, there's 7th Street, 8th Street, 9th Street, 10th Street. On 8th Street, between 3rd Avenue and 4th Avenue, I came across a brownstone on a street full of only residential brownstones that had the sign P.D.D.E. Rosa, R-O-S-A, P. de Rosa Grocery Store. And it was in gilt gold, letters, and I wondered, what is this doing? And by the way, underneath it, there was actually one of those old signs of Rheingold beer. Remember that beer? And then another one, Schaefer beer, Schaefer all around. Everybody knows that, Schaefer all around, right? Rheingold is the extra beer, etc., okay? I'm not going to become a singer here, This is what happens, when comedians are telling stories and they get really comfortable with the stories, they decide they're going to become a singer. Then they sing terribly and nobody wants to hear them anymore. So we're not going to do that. But I looked at the sign and I said, what is this doing here? It looked like somebody's living room. So I asked a woman from Venezuela who was sitting on the stoop across the street. I said to her, what is this all about? And she said, used to be a grocery store 20 years ago. This man, he came from Naples, and his wife, she came from Sicily, and they came here as immigrants. And then they told the grandchildren, that they would give them the house, but that they had to keep the sign there. Sounds like a good story. But you can't always believe everything. So I decided to go across the street and ring the bell. But judging from who answered, I knew I wasn't getting any answers because it was a dog. And so, who only knows one word. And so I realized I'm not getting any help there. But a year later, I came back, and I rang the bell again, and this time I talked to the grandchild, to the grandson, and his wife. And I said to them, what's the story here? Was this in the will? Is this how you got the house? That's the way I talk to people. It's better that way, before they know it, they're in the interview. So they said to me, well, no, we wanted to do it. We wanted to remember and enshrine his immigrant journey, how hard he worked when he came to America and when he had this grocery store. And that's why we do it. And every Christmas and Easter, we light up the Schaefer and the Rheingold signs. And I thought, that's just great. That's an example of filial piety. This is an example of how people appreciate their parents, their grandparents. Everybody wants to be appreciated, even if they don't know it because they're dead. They want to know that their children, their grandchildren remember them. But then again, it's the same story. If I had walked 7th Street and 9th Street and not 8th Street, I would have never found it. So this is an example. Or one time I was walking in Bushwick, and I saw a man. He was walking with 4 pit bulls, and he had 2 boa constrictors wrapped around his neck. Now, let me tell you something. This does not go over big in Bayside. And it doesn't go over big on 77th Street and Park Avenue. You can only get away with that stuff in Bushwick. This is a Sunday morning. And he's walking, and he sees this woman walking with her little daughter. And he says, would you like to pet these dogs? She says, no, I don't want to pet these dogs. He says, now he turns to me, a total stranger to him. He said, now, there's a guy about 30 years old. He says, she's not being a nice New Yorker. I'm thinking, she's being a smart New Yorker who wants to get bitten by a pit bull. And he walked on. So I fell into step with him. 3 minutes later, there's a man also walking, a young kid. He says, would you like to touch these boa constrictors? How about your son touching these boa constrictors? Yeah, he was up for it. The guy says, sure. He figured if the guy's got him around his neck, what's going to happen to him? So the kid touched him, and then he gave him the boa constrictor and wrapped it around the kid. And you see, what we learn here is people are different. Not everybody's the same way. Now, I found a method of doing this to be very, very effective. I was once walking near Lincoln Center, and I passed by a garage. And again, I'm not planning. I'm just trying to think. And that's how you construct something interesting. You keep your mind open. And I see this guy, and he's waving one of these orange flags. You ever see these orange flags they wave outside garages? Fairly summoning, not beckoning, fairly summoning you to go and park in their garage. And they wave them very vigorously, and people go into the garage. It means the garage is available. So I go over to the guy. I said, "What kind of crap job is this you got?" He says, "What do you mean?" He says, "This is a good job." I said, "What's good about it?" He says, "This is not the only thing I'm doing." I said, "What else are you doing?" "Oh," he says, I said, what do you even call this job?" He says, "Menton." I said, "Menton?" I said, "What's Menton?" So he was from Guatemala, and he was an immigrant, but he didn't speak English that well. So he says, "Menton." So like he says to me louder, "Menton." There are these people, you've met them all over the world. They think that if they say something that you don't understand and you ask them again, if they say the same word louder, you will understand it. This is not the way languages are taught. You don't just scream at somebody. That doesn't help. So he said Menton. So I figured if I don't know what Menton is, I'm going to ask what Menton does. So I said to him, "When you do Menton, what do you do?" I figured that'll give me the answer. He says, "Oh, I park the cars, I take the tickets, I clean up the place." I said, "You mean maintenance?" He says, "Yes, Menton." I said, "Okay, Menton it is." So I said, listen, buddy." I said, I don't know why I was seized by this, but I thought, hey, it'll be fun. I said, "Do you mind if I wave that flag? You got that? I want to see what it feels like to wave that flag." So then he became concerned for my welfare. He says, "Are you okay?" I said, "It's all right, I'm a professor." "Oh," he gives me the flag. Now, I have to tell you, you'll ask me, why did I tell him I'm a professor? What does that have to do with waving a flag? Well, it doesn't. But what I discovered is that in New York City, people are very busy. They don't have time to really talk to you. And half the time, they're not really listening. So I could go into a real estate office and say, "Excuse me, may I make a copy of something? My daughter's getting married next week." "Sure." They ask me, "Why don't you make a copy in your own place? Why don't you go to a copy place?" No, they don't ask me. They're not even listening to what I told them. "Go ahead. You know, can I use your bathroom a minute? I have an appointment with my dentist later on." "Sure, go ahead." Nothing to do with anything. So this also happens. So I take the flag, I start waving the flag, and in 1 minute, this stupid flag curls up. It curls up around the stick, and I can no longer wave it. And I feel like a fool. I said, "Look at this. You're a professor. The most elementary task you cannot master. You can't figure out how to wave a flag and let it stay loose." And by the way, I was hoping when I was waving the flag that none of my neighbors would see me because they know I teach in a university. They'd say, "You fall on hard times? What happened to you? You working for a parking garage now?" Anyway, he gives me back, I sheepishly give him back the flag. And suddenly he says to me, "I know who you are." I said, "Really? Who am I?" Because I'm usually playing so many roles, I don't remember who I am. So he says, "I know who you are." He says, "You're the boss." Suddenly I remembered there was this show. You remember the show Undercover Boss? Where the boss would spy on the workers, would go and pretend to be a worker? So he thought I was an undercover boss. So I figured, why argue? I said, "You never know, could be," and he was happy. Now, in the business of sociology, we're not just in the business of telling stories, that's for comedians. I said, we have to have a takeaway. There has to be a lesson to the story. The lesson that I took away from that is that we have become a surveillance society because it didn't bother him that I was undercover. You see, in a city where there are cameras on every block, every store has a camera, every building has a camera, the police have cameras on flagpoles, parks have cameras, everybody's on camera all the time. And what happens is you become desensitized to it. You become so used to it that you don't even notice it anymore. So when when he saw that I was doing this, it was no big deal to him. The ACLU has gotten no traction on trying to ban these cameras. Why? Because after 9/11 and after terrorism, and with a high crime rate around 2000, people decided that safety is more important than privacy. And that's what we've given up, that privacy, but we want to be safe. I have to tell you, in my walks, because I walked every neighborhood in New York. And at all times of the day, whether it's Brownsville, East New York, Park Slope, South Jamaica, it didn't matter, Astoria. And when I walked these neighborhoods, I talked to people who were like on the darker side of life. They were criminals. I said to him, "What are you most afraid of?" They said to me, "I'm not afraid of the cops so much. I'm afraid of the camera, because that means that even if nobody saw you do the crime, the camera saw you, and I could go to jail for a long time for that." So we know that they're effective. They are definitely effective, and many a crime has been solved because of these cameras. So now, what I want to do is, I want to stop for a minute, for 6 minutes. I had the good fortune to be on a show called Sunday Morning CBS News with Charles Osgood. Any of you ever watched that show? How many of you watched that show? Yeah, well, with 6 million viewers every week, it's a great show to get on, and I knew I would find some people here who watch it. So I'm going to show you the segment of me walking through the city, because when you see that segment, you'll really get a graphic view of what I actually do, because they spend 4 days walking around the 5 boroughs with me, and we saw some interesting stuff. So if you don't mind, we're ready to show it now. Well, thank you very much. There's an interesting backstory to this. When I thought of writing an article about immigration, and I wrote it, and I gave it to the Times. They had published several other things I had done, and they'd interviewed me many times, so I thought I'll give it to the New York Times, the paper of record. And they turned it down. Well, people who write know that you got to have about 10 submissions to get one acceptance, if you're lucky. Most people never get an acceptance. So I thought, well, if they're not going to take it, I've already written it, let me try somebody else. So I contacted the Daily News, and they accepted it, and they published it. And then, I thought that was fine. Now, I got 2 very memorable responses from that. The first was from Cardinal Dolan, who told me he loved the article about immigration. Basically, I said, why is it that people, in Europe, in Sweden, in Germany, in all these other countries, get all worked up about immigrants coming to their country, and sometimes, and this is, we're not even talking about the latest waves of people who have come to Europe, but before that, and they have only 2 or 3 groups. And we have people coming from hundreds of countries in New York City, and we don't really get too worked up about it. I mean, Elmhurst, Queens has, I think, the largest concentration of people from different countries of any place in the United States. And what is the reason for that? So one reason was that when everybody is new, nobody is new. In other words, when you got so many people coming from so many countries, nobody really feels like they're singled out in any particular way, shape, or form. Another thing was that this country is a place that emphasizes that it's really too busy to get involved in all these fights and everything else. And people come from countries where if they met the other party, let's say Indians and Pakistanis, if they met the other party in the old country, they could be much, much more hostile. Here, they live in the same neighborhoods, they run businesses together. Muslims and Jews have stores on Coney Island right next to each other, and they get along fine with each other. And so it's a totally, totally different place. Anyway, the second call I got was from that woman up here, Ashley Veli. She says, I was wondering, I heard about your journey through New York, and we thought we'd like to do a segment on you on CBS. And I knew that this was the #1 show, and that it would be a very, very rare opportunity that hardly anybody, even who's a writer, ever gets. And I said, well, sure, okay, sure I want to do it. And I said to her, by the way, how did you hear of this? She said, oh, I saw the article in the Daily News. I said to her, what papers do you read in New York City? She says, oh, I only read the Daily News and the Post. I don't have time to read anything else. I said, never read the New York Times? Who has time to read that long paper? Now, imagine if the Times had taken it. I wouldn't have this video to show you because she would have never found out about it. So before people get all snooty and talk about how it's better to be published in the Times and the Daily News, I say, think again. You'll never really know. So what did I want to say about immigration? I mean, there were so many things I could say, but let's talk about, very briefly, what Brooklyn and Queens have in common. What unites them? And what unites them is the following. First of all, there's an emphasis on diversity. Not a voluntary emphasis, but people live in so many neighborhoods and come together from so many different countries that, if you go to Cambria Heights, if you're white and you walk through Cambria Heights, it's pretty much an all-black neighborhood. But that does not reveal the complexity of it. You have people from Haiti, you have people from other parts of the West Indies, from Jamaica, from Barbados, and it's really a complex of cultures which you most appreciate when you walk down Linden, the same boulevard where they had these art drawings, and you see it. And how do you learn about what the diversity of a neighborhood is? By looking at the stores. That's one way to do it. Another one is to look at the houses of worship. And so that's the case there. Or take, for example, diversity. Take, for example, the Orthodox Jewish community of Queens, right? We tend to think of it as Orthodox Jews. That's a category. It's a category like African Americans. But there are many different types of people within every category. And rightly so, they should be judged as individuals. And so in the Orthodox neighborhoods of Queens, what are the Orthodox neighborhoods of Queens? Well, you've got Forest Hills, you've got Rego Park, you've got a swath going all the way through to Jamaica Estates, even as far as New Hyde Park, Queens, which is basically also an Indian neighborhood. You go to Hillside Avenue, you'll find Singer's Pizza. I mean, it's not like it's monolithic, and that's one of the points, that it's very, very diverse. But even among these Orthodox Jews, you have Bukharian Jews who live in Forest Hills, who have their own temples, who have many of their own restaurants. And I often think to myself, what happens when people who are not Jewish end up working as waiters or as busboys or as employees for people of other nationalities? These are contexts that are made that we really don't understand. I call it daygration. They'll come into another neighborhood, work there during the day, and then they'll go home. But they've made contact with people. An Italian physician treats Hispanic patients. What are the relationships there? An Asian gas station owner, comes into contact with people in a neighborhood that's a black neighborhood, say in Canarsie, and has a whole different interaction. A nurse who's Filipino works with elderly Jewish patients in a nursing home somewhere in Sheepshead Bay. These are all contexts that we never learn anything about, that we never really discover, and we need to explore them further. And so, if you look at the community, well, there are these Jews that are called Sephardic Jews, then there are Ashkenazi Jews, and there are Jews who come from Eastern European countries, and they will live in Jamaica Estates along with the other Jews, and they have interactions, and they have stereotypes about each other, and they have groups that they don't like. It's all a reworking of the entire phenomenon. So that's one thing. These two boroughs have diversity. The other thing they have is engagement. Engagement means that they'll force you to engage with each other. And you really don't have a choice, because when you live cheek to jowl in a city like New York City, in Brooklyn and Queens, you meet people from other backgrounds. And you will have to engage. Now, sometimes these engagements are not friendly. For example, in Brooklyn, in the Borough Park section, the Sunset Park section, Sunset Park goes as far as, say, the middle of this avenue, of the street between 8th Avenue and 9th Avenue. So you have Chinese people who are fighting to buy homes for their group, and you have Hasidic Jews who are fighting to buy homes for their group. But the Hasidic Jews are so insular, and you really learn that when you walk there. Every Friday, right before sunset, a siren goes off in their neighborhoods, like the Muezzin's call to prayer. A siren goes off in their neighborhood, telling people it's about 10 minutes before the Sabbath, and then you have to obey the Sabbath. They get a warning for their own community. And each one has their own particular forms of identity and doesn't always know what's going on with the other one. The other thing is that change is occurring. Change is occurring in both of these boroughs at a very rapid rate. The story of the future for Queens and for Brooklyn is really to be found within a certain number of groups that are moving. And these groups are, first of all, African American groups. But it's not the same in every part of the these neighborhoods. You have, for example, you'll have all black neighborhoods, like I said, in Cambria Heights. You'll have an all black neighborhood in St. Albans. And you'll have these people who were entertainers lived in a little subsection of Queens called Adderley Park. Now, then you will have neighborhoods that are integrated. Neighborhoods that are integrated like Ditmas Park. I recently did a book review for a journal about a guy who wrote a book called Ghetto, and it was about Chicago. And I was asked to explain what are the differences between Chicago and New York City. Well, there are numerous differences, structural as well as ethnic. And one of the things about Chicago is that it doesn't have many of these integrated, almost none, of integrated neighborhoods like Ditmas Park in Brooklyn, or like the Chelsea West Village part of Manhattan, or like the East Village. There are neighborhoods that are integrated. Now, the point of this is that we need to recognize that not everybody wants to integrate. In other words, the only color that matters these days in New York City is green. It's not black, it's not white, it's green. In other words, if a black person had enough money and wanted to move to Douglaston, he can do that today. They could not do that 30 years ago. There would have been real estate realtors who would have given them the runaround. Today, doesn't matter, you got the money. But you know what? They don't want to. As my colleague Elijah Anderson, who is one of the most prominent black sociologists in the world, and he's a good friend of mine because we do the same kind of work, explained to me, a lot of black people don't like white people. You got to get that through your head. You could be as liberal as you want, but understand that given the history of slavery, they don't like white people. And not only that, even if they are inclined to like white people, and even if they must because they work with them, but even if they are so inclined, they don't have anything in common with most white people. They don't go to the same church. They don't eat at the same restaurants. They don't like the same things. They don't belong to the same clubs, be it Jack and Jill, whatever it is. And they don't really relate to each other. I learned that because the first book I ever wrote was about the Black Panthers in the late 60s, for whom I worked as a liaison officer. And I found out all these things from the inside. And the fact of the matter is that they don't have much in common with each other. And if they don't have much in common with each other, they don't want to live near each other. And if you like certain foods, you know, like the kind of food that tourists get at Sylvia's in Manhattan and Harlem, if you like certain kinds of foods, you're not going to get them in an all-white neighborhood because they don't have the restaurants for them. So you're like an outlier. But what they do want, and what they do insist upon, is the right to decide whether or not they want to live in that neighborhood. They want the choice. And I did some interviews with people who are living in gentrified neighborhoods. So these groups, the black community and the Orthodox community, they're the ones that are moving in to these areas. The other one is, of course, the Asian community, but here it's much more pronounced in Queens, where like the entire area, let's say, if you go up Northern Boulevard from 149th Street to 252nd Street, it's mostly Korean. You know it from the stores. And this is taking place over a period of time, and now the Koreans and the Chinese are starting to move to Long Island. And this is part of a very, very pervasive pattern. What does this do? Who knows? We don't know. I will say to you this. If you ask me what's going to be the future of New York City, and I address this issue in the book, it's going to probably be assimilation, but not necessarily. New York City is made up of three types of people. Those who don't want anything to do with anybody else, those who want something to do but not a lot, and those who want a lot to do, those who like the idea of assimilation, how cool it is that a Chinese man is married to a black woman. They love that. They think that's great. And for those people, that's the future, and that's what's going to happen. So over a period of time, we're going to see assimilation, because the more contact there is, the more assimilation there's going to be. But not everybody's into it, and again, the choice is theirs to make. Gentrification, is it a good idea? Is it a bad idea? Well, that depends. You know, if you're, for example, a black person living in Bedford-Stuyvesant, where there are three groups moving in, the three groups are, if you know anything about Bedford-Stuyvesant, coming from the north, you've got the Satmar Hasidim. Coming from the south, you've got the Crown Heights Casinos. They're called a Lubavitcher. And in the middle, you have the black community. But besides the black community, you have a fourth group, gentrifiers, who are coming in. And they are fighting for their property. Now, if you're a black person, you own a brownstone, and that brownstone couldn't be sold for more than $250,000. And suddenly somebody's giving you $1 million, you like the gentrifiers. You'll find another place to live in. But if you're a renter and you're being tossed out of your apartment, that's a totally, totally different story. Let me just tell you a little secret. We don't even understand gentrification because one thing we don't know, where did the displaced go? You know, when the gentrifiers were coming in and taking these apartments, nobody looked or nobody thought to find out what's happening. Where did Mr. Sanchez go? Did he go to Hauppauge, Long Island? Where did Mr. Jones go? Did he go to a farm in North Carolina? And the reason these are irrelevant questions is because we have to know if it's displaced. We know how many people who were displaced moved to another part of the same neighborhood? We haven't studied that. So if we don't know the answer, how can we understand gentrification? But one thing I will tell you about gentrification, it happens side by side. Gentrifiers move into a neighborhood. It doesn't matter if they're black. There are black gentrifiers too. This is a class issue. This is an issue of money. And when gentrifiers move into a neighborhood, they don't have a lot to do with the people who are there. Because again, they don't have anything in common with them. The income level is this much of a disparity, so they really can't really relate to them. So let me show a couple of photos, and then I'm going to take questions. These are photos I took, which really show something. I want to show you something that's really kind of funny. Let's hope it works. Okay, double click, sorry. Now, you're saying to me, what the hell is he doing here? What is this? What is this, a Coca-Cola bottle? And a pineapple. That's what it is. It's a pineapple made of a marble-covered pineapple. I found this to be very humorous. I walked by this house in East Flatbush, and there was a soda bottle that said, have a Coke with Austin. I don't know who Austin is, but he's somebody, you know, and he's got this thing. Well, you have to understand, if you'll go through the brownstones of New York City, there are many, many buildings that have pineapples in front of them. And the reason is that the pineapple was a welcome sign in New York City, because a couple of hundred years ago, when people went on a sea voyage, they had no vitamin C because they couldn't refrigerate anything. And then, when they came back, and people came to the pier to greet them after a long journey, they greeted them with pineapples. They gave them pineapples. So the pineapple became the welcome sign. And that's why to this day, there are so many pineapples in front of so many buildings. So I thought, what a funny thing. Austin is welcoming you, and the pineapple is welcoming you. And I thought that was really weird and funny. Now let's see if I can go back. Okay. Now here, Amersfoort Park. This is a park in Flatlands, East Flatbush. And this park is beautiful, has a gorgeous gazebo, and it's really, really something very, very nice to see. But what was not known was that there was to be a fight between the Crips and the Bloods in this park one night. Only it never happened. It never happened because the police found out about it, and that was the end of it. So my point was to say that the city has got all sorts of things happening that you never really know. You want to know something about, and this is another very important point. Let me just tell you about Little Neck, because I've started working on a book on Queens. If you go on 254th Street off of Little Neck Parkway, and you go up the long block that is a shortcut to the Long Island Expressway, first you'll see a house that's 12,225 square feet. Inside, there's a batting cage, there's a granite inlaid pool, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful building, beautiful home, and it's gigantic. Well, I found out that Edgar Alfonso, who played for the Mets, was the owner of this home. Then at the end of the block, remember this, 254th and the LIE Expressway Service Road, there's a house that I can only describe to you. It looks like Dr. Seuss. It's got curved exterior, it's got certain patterns, it's got glass, it's got windows. I only saw one house like this in the entire city. If you're ever in that neighborhood, it's worth seeing. And then there's a house of a house that looks very nondescript, but I happened to find out about the history of it. This was a house where a 47-year-old man went berserk, killed his parents, killed three people who were his friends and acquaintances. And after he killed these people, he did this one day, and then he fled across Little Neck Parkway into Lake Success on Bates Road, where he took hostage a psychiatrist, a Dr. Gregory, a 71-year-old psychiatrist, and he kept him hostage there for the entire day, and he was shooting at anything around him, shooting at the police, shooting at the ground or whatever, and the only thing he asked for was a six-pack of Coca-Cola. And then he did this the entire day, and then he shot himself. Now, this story begged for an explanation. First of all, this story shows you that neighborhoods have histories. They have all sorts of things that happen in them that we do not know anything about and that we need to know about. For example, in this particular case, the question is, the man had exhibited odd behavior for years. He followed women, he peeked into windows, he would take a golf club and he would smash urns and stuff in people's gardens, flower pots. And you wonder, did anybody notice this? Did anybody think to call the police? Did anybody want to do anything? Or do people, a la Kitty Genovese and Kew Gardens, simply don't want to accept responsibility for something? Because the problem is, when you accept responsibility, you must do something. And if you must do something, you come to face the fact that maybe you're not willing to do something. But this tragedy of these 5 people dying may have been avertible, if you will, could have been averted, if people had known about it. And what is the history, and how many more neighborhoods do these things happen? If I hadn't walked into a carpet place, it's called Best Class Carpet on Northern Boulevard and 251st Street, I would have never learned about the Zoroastrian community in the metropolitan area. The man was a Zoroastrian Persian, and every March he told me he goes to the Little Neck station, and they use the parking lot of an Armenian cultural center, and all the Persians who live in Great Neck go there to celebrate the Near Eastern holiday of Nowruz, N-O-W-R-U-Z. They light fires, they have parties, and they come together. So all this was, the kinds of stuff that I learned during this experience. Now, let me just go to the next one. Mill Basin Deli, I'm going to skip that. This one, talk about the history. You see that Flatlands Church of God? That's a good joke. Flatlands Church of God, yes, from 1997 on. But in the 1980s, it was a chop shop of the mafia, run by a criminal, a mobster by the name of Roy DeMeo, D-E-M-E-O. And this was where, when they killed people, they used to chop them up, put them in plastic bags, put them in a car, and take them out to the town, to the dump near Fountain Avenue in Brooklyn. And when I asked the pastor of the church, I said, "Did you know this?" "No, I didn't know anything about it." I said, "How do you feel about this notorious location?" He says, "Well, to tell you the truth," he says, "I feel that it's a good thing that the church took it over because we pray for their souls every week." And again, you walk by a quiet place, if you don't do the investigation, if you don't do the homework, you don't really find out about it, and you don't really know about it. I'll just show you a couple more, and then I'm happy to take questions. This is Steve's place, Steve Campanella. Great, great place, 2058 85th Street. Just go visit it, you'll see. There's murals, there's a very interesting building, there's Dumbo. This is the Naval Commandant's home in Vinegar Hill of the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Been there for a very long time, interesting murals again. This one, Mike Macatron did this one. That's a photograph of a snail, and at the top is a fire hydrant, which when you look closely has little openings as though it's an apartment building, and those are stairs leading up to the top of the snail. And there's all sorts of interpretations of it. You go on the internet, you find it. Gottlieb's Restaurant. It's a Hasidic restaurant, but more about them. Those are the hats that they wear there on the sign. And this one, stockings whose color closely resembles the skin are not to be worn. They had a whole legal fight about this. Apparently they were upheld, that they were allowed to do that. And tell people you have to have that if you want. This used to be a church. Now it's been reconverted in Williamsburg to a parking lot. This is a most beautiful church. St. Michael's Church on Jerome Avenue in East New York, right near Mrs. Maxwell's Bakery, also in East New York. Mrs. Maxwell's Bakery, that's the outside of the church, Mrs. Maxwell's, this, by the way, is the killing grounds of the mafia on Ruby, Emerald, and Sapphire Streets off Linden Boulevard, right near the Queens-Brooklyn border. Across the road is Howard Beach, where the famous John Gotti was. And this is another example. They say the ground moves at night, but that's best reserved for Halloween and, good movies. Now look what's happening. Gentrification, I don't know, but there's affordable housing. Houses are going up right on the site of this, and it'll be gone. That's another thing about New York and about Brooklyn and Queens that they have in common. They're always changing. This is a great mural. This is a very interesting mural. This mural, I'm sorry it's not that clear, but this mural is dedicated to the founder of Zionism, Theodore Herzl. And I'm walking in Brownsville along Pitkin Avenue, and I'm saying, what the hell is this thing doing here? I know that Brownsville was once 100% Jewish, but this mural was put up 4 years ago. So who did it? So I look at the artist, and I see his name is Misha Tutunik. Sound like a possibly Jewish name. So I thought maybe he was the advisor. Maybe he got the kids to do it. So I call him up, and I say, who did this? He says, well, black teenagers did it in Brownsville. I said, really? I said, did you give them the idea to do this? He says, no. I said, oh, I thought maybe you did. Does it sound like a Jewish name? He says, well, my father is Jewish, my mother is Catholic, but I am Catholic. And having grown up in the Soviet Union, I never heard of Theodore Herzl. No, it was the students' idea. I said, how did they get the idea? And then we find out that the 16-year-old high school student African-American living in Brownsville, was reading up on the history of the neighborhood. And he found that there was this slogan that this man Herzl had. And the slogan said, if you will it, it is not a dream. And that inspired them. That made them think to themselves, this is an appropriate slogan for our culture. If you will it, it is not a dream. And so they adopted it. And so that's why they put it up there. Now, the average person would think the Jewish Federation decided to have outreach to the black community and they did it together. Nothing of the sort. It was entirely a black-inspired project. And neutral. And really shows us where black-Jewish relations are today. It's not like the old days where they had coalitions and where they got together and everything like that. Things are very different today. It's an indifferent relationship. It's there. Now look at this. This is Park Slope. This is Harmony Playground. And this in Park Slope is a playground made up entirely of musical instruments. And you're looking at, on the left side, you're looking at a harp that spouts water during the summer. This is a dog lake. This is a dog pond in Prospect Park. And this is where after Hurricane Sandy hit, they made a park out of everything that fell down. This is, as advertised in your brochure, a house made up of buttons, beads, glass, really, really incredible, of a woman who wanted to do something positive after being so depressed about 9/11. This is a mural outside the prison, the Brooklyn House of Detention. This is the old Sweet and Low sign. Remember that? This is where the building was. The building is in Fort Greene. This is a kosher store that tries to be contemporary so that people don't leave the faith. Look how classy this sushi thing looks. The rest of the outfit, it's not some grimy place. This is an example of political incorrectness. You cannot see it so well, but this sign is in Yiddish, and these people are talking about minks. They're talking about minks, and they say, and there's this store called Kraus, which sells these fur hats that Hasidic Jews wear that are made from minks. And they say, look what Kraus has made of us, one mink says to another. And the other mink says, yes, Kraus is the most wonderful place in the world. Now this means they're being killed for their fur. But since nobody except them understands the Yiddish, nobody really knows what's going on here. Well, that was an interesting experience. This is a Cambodian temple. And this Cambodian temple is one of only two. The other one's in the Bronx, this one's in Brooklyn, in Flatbush. Okay, this is too long to go into. This is where Al Capone got married, St. Mary Star of the Sea Church, and that is in Carroll Gardens. 1915. This is an example of things this is a very funny, upbeat-looking clown. Somebody did this. It's not there anymore. Can't find it. The city's always changing. You look for something, then you can't find it. This is a 7-year-old kid playing on his instrument in the subway. This is my dog. I don't know how my dog got in here, but I want to tell you something. My dog is very hardy. She walked 400 of these miles. And by the way, my wife walked 800 of them. Sometimes you like company. Yes, okay, I think that's the end. I don't know what happened with the dog. So, let me stop here. I thank you for your patience. I hope you found it of interest. And I'm ready to take any questions. So, any comments, questions? Yes, sir.
Writing this book, just from your experience on the streets, or did you do any outside research of the communities?
My book has 800 references, articles and books. That's the short answer. And by the way, if you don't know your stuff, you can't do a book like this. But I only want to talk to you about the interesting stuff. Now, if you're very interested in the footnotes, of which there are hundreds, it's in the back of the book. But I stuck it in the back of the book. But it's a very good question because you know something? If you don't do the right research, you don't find out anything. You know, the best researcher is a dumb researcher in terms of curiosity. But in terms of finding out things, look, I'll give you an example. And by the way, you must ask questions. When I was walking in East Harlem on 124th Street, I came across a 5-story mural of the Irish freedom fighters and the hunger strike that, led by Bobby Sands, they went on. So I looked, but that, you see, you can't find in a book. That's the problem. But there's lots that you can find in books. I mean, I teach these courses. They're at the doctoral level. When I looked at it, I said, what is this thing doing here? I know Sunnyside is an Irish neighborhood. The Woodlawn section in the Bronx has become home to many Irish immigrants. But what is this thing about Bobby Sands? And it showed Mahatma Gandhi, peace fighter, in a little photo, and then Malcolm X and everything. So I asked some people, because you got to start somewhere. And they told me that this has to do with the black community want to show solidarity with the Irish freedom fighters. That's why you have Malcolm X. I said, oh, that's very, very interesting. But, you know, I can't rely on that. So I kept asking. There was a police precinct nearby. So I asked in the police precinct, and they said, no, that was done by the IRA. I said, who at the IRA? Brian McCabe. I said, who's Brian McCabe? He's the PBA union. He says it was a lawyer. I looked him up. He was at Rockefeller Center. I called him up. I said, you have this thing about the Irish community put up in Harlem. Why is it in East Harlem? It was between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. He said, well, actually, he says, I didn't want to put it there. I said, what do you mean? Where did you want to put it? He says, I wanted to put it on Houston Street, but it was too expensive. So I said, so you went to a cheap place? I said, you could have found a cheap place in South Dakota, but nobody would have ever seen it. No, he says, I wanted a place in Manhattan. So I said, what made you choose this place? Did it have anything to do with the fact that you wanted to show solidarity with the black community? What are you talking about? It had nothing to do with that. Okay, it had nothing to do with it. Fine, that's okay. I said, so what was the reason? He says, because every day, thousands of automobiles during the rush hour make the right turn onto 124th Street, and they get stuck in traffic. Traffic crawls to 2nd Avenue and the Robert F. Kennedy Bridge, and they got nothing to do. So we thought they'd have to look at this. Instead of reading a book, they would pass the time and look at this. How could you know that? Or I see a place on Rivington Street and Allen Street on the Lower East Side, which is now rapidly gentrifying, and I see it says Epstein's Bar. I thought, so this is what it's come to. The Jews are now so assimilated, they drink a lot. They go to bars. I thought this was the province of the Irish. So I'm thinking to myself, Epstein's Bar. I go inside and I say, can I speak to Mr. Epstein? There's no Mr. Epstein. I said, oh, okay. So I said, why is it called Epstein's Bar? Oh, that's a different reason. Oh, I see what you're asking, she says, not Jewish, from California. She says, well, what happened was, he says, you remember that show, Welcome Back, Kotter? Yes. So there was this character called Juan Epstein. He was half Puerto Rican, half Jewish. And since this neighborhood was once very Jewish, and then it became much more Puerto Rican, we thought we would combine the two, and we called it Epstein's Bar. Oh, okay. This is how we learn things. Other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
I was very disappointed to hear you say about your prominent black sociologist colleague saying that he doesn't want to live in a certain neighborhood because we hate the white people. I mean, that's pretty terrible.
Yeah, it sounds very awful. Well, I'm glad you raised the question because I now have the opportunity to clear it up. Let me just tell you that he did not say hate. He said don't like. And there is a nuance. Like when you say you don't like something, it's not like, hey, oh, we don't want to quibble, but hate is a much stronger term. And if he hated them, I'd be worried that he's killing them. So that's one thing. The other thing is that he didn't say we hate. He said that black people hate. By the way, I'll let you in on a little secret. He doesn't hate white people. You know how I know that? His wife is white. Now this you couldn't know because I didn't tell you, so I'm not blaming you, God forbid. But what I want you to understand is that he has written 10 books on the black community. He is the reigning expert on the sociology of the black community. And he wrote a book called The Cosmopolitan Canopy. Now he actually has a lot of friends who are white, like myself, and he is a person who doesn't feel that way, but he's studying other people. And he can only report what he hears. And when he asks them how they feel about white people, you could be disappointed. I'm also disappointed. I'd like to feel that they could like me. And I want to say, just to balance it out, friendships do develop. And we have integrated neighborhoods in Brooklyn and in Queens that have black and white people living there getting along famously. But he's talking about the average person. He's not talking about the 30% who are getting along great. He's talking about the 70%. Now, does he know? Yes, he knows. He spent 45 years studying this. I met him when I was teaching at Yale and interviewed him for a position there, and I've known him ever since. So I have to tell you, please don't give up. There's lots of hope. There's lots of white and black people who like each other. You want to know how you find that out? Take a walk on a Sunday morning and walk between 124th Street and 116th Street on 8th Avenue, now known as Frederick Douglass Boulevard. You'll walk into the restaurants, you'll see black and white people eating together, talking with each other, or come to City College. We've had 3 black presidents at City College. I'm very happy to say that I ran the Conflict Resolution Center at City College for 20 years with a man who is black and who teaches in the department. And now, when the Crown Heights riots happened, we had focus groups, we talked to people, so it's really not, pardon the pun, it's not a black and white picture, okay? Other questions? Yes?
So I'm very interested in your preparation. Did you plan which blocks we're going to walk on a particular day, and did you do research on the place before you went?
I noticed you were interested in the whole talk. I have to tell you, your enthusiasm showed, and I appreciate and I'm gratified for that. But now let me answer your question. I had a map, I had little maps of every neighborhood, and every day when I came home, I wrote down what blocks I walked on so I shouldn't forget, although I will say you gotta have a pretty good memory to walk all these blocks, because you can't get up in New York City and start talking about neighborhoods if you didn't walk them. They're gonna nail you in 1 second. I tell my students, when I teach a class, I say, if you live in New York City, I've walked by your house. And then somebody would say, yeah, I live on Crotona Avenue here and there. I said, I didn't see you. Well, of course, because I didn't have them when I was walking. I have them now. But the point is that I tried not to over-research it. Why? I wanted my brain to be fresh so that I could discover new things. And so I didn't prepare in that way. But of course, I knew the subject, and I knew a lot about these neighbors. I couldn't help that. But I had a pedometer, and every day when I came home, I used my iPhone in the later years. Before that I didn't have one, but I used it as a tape recorder. I talked to people, and to tell you the truth, I used the inductive rather than the deductive method of doing research, which is to say that I didn't have a very hard fixed outline. Because you see, when you make an outline of what you're going to do, you almost become trapped inside it. You become forced to follow what you've decided is important. And I don't think, speaking anthropologically, like a person who goes to a village somewhere, I don't think you can assume that you know what's important until you're out there. So each day I would have a note. I had 700 pages of notes more than I wrote in the book. And from that, I had to filter and pare down what I was going to do. Now people said to me, but you don't know how it's going to be. Well, I have a way of doing the research. In other words, when I do the research, and then I go over what fits into a discussion of immigration, I look at everything, and then I divide it into subcategories. And then after I divide the subcategories, I divide it further into subcategories. And if I hear new things that I didn't know about, I create new categories. So this is all a very, very complex I teach research methods. So this is a very, very complex process. You have to understand that no sociologist had ever done more than 20 blocks of a neighborhood. So when you're the first guy on the block, you got to get creative. In other words, I had no roadmap for how to do this. Sociologists would study a neighborhood for 8 years and they would write it up. But the problem was, how did we know it represented anything? So I decided to rely on 4 categories. One was New York City as a space. That includes even a view. That includes a bridge. That includes a store sign. That's what space means. And the second one was categories. Categories are union workers, bodega owners, people from Guatemala, whatever. And then the third thing was issues. Issues meant things that they are concerned about: crime, gentrification, immigration, all those kinds of things. And then the fourth category was geography. In other words, looking at the neighborhoods as they existed. And from that, I derived the principles. Now, when I give examples in the book about things, how do I decide what examples to include? Well, there are 2 considerations. The first consideration is I use things that have repeated themselves in a pattern a couple of hundred times around the city. Then I know it's true in that sense. And the other thing is things that are so unique, like the boa constrictor example, that it's worth putting in for the hell of it. I asked a guy in Gerritsen Beach, Brooklyn, "What's that horse doing in your backyard?" That's a good way to start an interview. Or, "You must be one of the last white people left in Canarsie. What are you doing here?" The people didn't mind, because they're New Yorkers. They're used to that kind of aggressive, weirdo sense of humor, when you go up to people like that. They handle it. They deal with it. Let's put it this way. In 6,000 miles, nobody refused to talk to me. That speaks for itself. How did I go into bad neighborhoods and talk to people? I'll tell you what I did. When I walked into a neighborhood like East New York, and I was walking on Alabama Avenue, and somebody looked at me, I grabbed them. I grabbed them visually. I made eye contact with them. They're never used to that. They think you're some old white guy, you're going to slink by, and maybe nobody will notice you. Well, they can tell. They can smell that in 1 second. You don't do that. When you're in these neighborhoods, you got to understand, you put yourself at their mercy. And if they have no mercy, you're dead. I didn't say there's no risk in doing this research. But what happened was, I would look at them and I'd say, "How you doing, buddy?" And they would melt, because it's the total counterintuitive approach. In other words, I'd look for the contact, and that put them off their guard. Am I right, Helene? She's my wife. She knows. She knows. You know what happened? She said, "I don't like you walking these neighborhoods. You're going to get killed." I said, "I'm not going to get killed." She says, "No, it's dangerous. It's dangerous." Because you see, I grew up in a tough, working class neighborhood in Manhattan, a really tough neighborhood. 105th Street was not gentrified when I grew up there. And I was the first person in my family to go to college. But my wife grew up in a slightly more sheltered environment. She lived in Sheepshead Bay, and it's a different story. So I said, "You know what? We're going to visit our son in California, in Los Angeles. We're going to take a walk. We're going to go through all the badass neighborhoods of Los Angeles. We're going to go through Compton. We're going to go through Crenshaw, down Crenshaw Street. We're going to go to Watts." I said, "And we're going to do this for 2 days. And by the way, that is gang territory, much more than here." I said, "And at the end of those 2 days, either you're not going to be worried, or you're also not going to be worried because we're going to be dead. You got your choice." I said, "Are you afraid?" No, she believes in me. We've been married a long time. She knows I wouldn't steer her wrong. So we walked, and she could tell you, we walked through these neighborhoods. It happened like 40 times that people would look at me like, "What the hell is this guy doing here?" These were all black neighborhoods. So, and then when I told them that, I said, "How's it going?" They said, "Okay, Pops." It's okay. You don't have to be afraid. Now, do you take a risk? Yeah, if some guy is doped up, he's on crack or something, or in a very bad mood, wants to rob you, you're going to get robbed. I only had one incident like that in all my walks. This came in the Whitman Housing Projects in Brooklyn, where a person, there was a 16-year-old teenager. I walked into the project, and I said to the guy, "Good morning. What's happening?" I have this friendly, joking way. And, "Good morning. What's happening?" Doesn't say a word to me. That got me nervous. And he looked down into this box he had and said something in Spanish, and 7 heads bobbed up across the small grassy oval to my left, and I realized I had probably walked into a drug deal at 11 a.m. So I said, later, buddy, have a great day. And I walked out in the opposite direction as slowly as my dignity could carry me. And that was the end of it. And that's the closest I came. Nothing else happened to me. I am a lucky man. But you know what? If you want to write a good book, you got to take chances. That's the only way to get it done. You can't write a book about all the nice neighborhoods of New York because nobody wants to read it. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, having grown up in Midwood, Brooklyn, and also lived in Queens.
And also lived in Queens?
Queens, yeah. For a few, I'd be interested to know, in your mind, what is the major difference you see, one of them, between Brooklyn and Queens?
Well, the major differences I already enumerated was that, first of all, the immigrant groups are different. Second of all, gentrification is taking place in a different way. Namely, I mean, there are many differences, but that's among them. Gentrification is taking place in a different way because what's gentrifying in Queens? Hunters Point, Astoria, Sunnyside, Jackson Heights. But out here, something else is taking place. Asians who have money to buy houses are moving in. Now, that's not gentrification. That's just one ethnic group replacing another. In Brooklyn, which is much more accessible, and that's another story, by the subway lines, gentrification is taking place in so many neighborhoods, in Dumbo, Vinegar Hill, Cobble Hill, Carroll Gardens, Red Hook. And by the way, a neighborhood like Red Hook can start to gentrify because it's right next to Gowanus, which is right next to Carroll Gardens, which is right next to Park Slope. You have that bounce back effect. You don't have that here because once you get beyond Jackson Heights, which then becomes Corona, which is largely poor and Hispanic, except for the old Italians who play bocce and go to the Parkside restaurant. So, you know, yeah, right. You see, that's what I meant. If you don't know what you're talking about, don't write a book like this. And don't claim you wrote it if you didn't do it. Now, to go a little further in this, that you have a lot more, what you do have in common is two fair zones. They exist in Gravesend and a Marine Park and in Flatlands. Now, do we have a Midwood? Yes, we do. We have Kew Gardens Hills. They're both right-wing, religiously Orthodox neighborhoods. So these two have something in common, but there are other differences. Pardon me? Well, you didn't ask me what's the difference between Queens when you grew up. Then I'd have to ask you when you grew up. But let's put it this way. The home of Woody Allen and all those things. Listen, I know I'm at least as old as you, if not older. And I do know Midwood from the old days. And in the old days, it was a much more Italian neighborhood, it was a much more mixed neighborhood. In other words, if you're going to write a book about New York, you must know the history of New York. Now, this guidebook that I wrote for Brooklyn is not at all like the first book. The first book has topics like community, gentrification, social life, ethnicity. This one has 6 pages, including Midwood, on every one of Brooklyn's 44 neighborhoods. So I would say you might want to go to your nearest library and read what was written about Midwood, because I think I'm the first person to actually do that. And by the way, we have references. You know that there's a book called Midwood, a history book by Oscar Israelowitz. In other words, if you don't know history, then you can't know sociology. So I agree with you, it's a lot different, but I thought you were asking me today. Okay, next. Was another, yes, sir.
When you mentioned submitting an article to the New York Times, which they did not accept, I'm curious. You're fairly well known. So wouldn't the New York Times do, in your case, what they do with many other people? If a famous person submits something to them, they print it because the person is famous, even if it isn't good.
Well, first of all, my name is not Stephen King, so I'm not that famous. Let's understand one thing. I don't want to exaggerate. Second of all, when they commission an article from me, which they have done, they are much more likely to accept it. But when I come to them out of the blue and say I want to write an article on immigration, it has to be something that they like. And you have to understand there are thousands of submissions made all the time. So you get lucky, but they will not, there are too many famous people for them to automatically do it. I mean, people more famous than me, in the tens of thousands submit articles, they just don't tell you about the ones that didn't get accepted.
And one other comment.
Yes, of course.
When you were mentioning different neighborhoods and the stereotypes that exist for different neighborhoods, it made me think of a different stereotype. I have a daughter who volunteered for the Israeli army, and she was a frontline combat sergeant. The people who were in the unit with her, this person was from Russia with a big crucifix. Another person was Muslim. A third person was Druze. This person was Christian. So I remember saying to her, isn't there anyone in the Israeli army who's Jewish?
Well, they may be studying in a yeshiva. Maybe they don't want us. Maybe they're conscientious objectors. But the point is well taken. We should not stereotype. I wrote a book called The Things They Say Behind Your Back, Stereotypes and the Myths Behind Them. And I love your comment. Okay, one more and then I'll quit. Or you tell me. You're in charge. How about, should I take two more? I'll take two more. I'll do them quickly. Yes.
I might have missed it, but how long did it take you to do the 6,000 miles approximately?
4 years. That was short. Yes?
You're in the neighborhood where they were developing all the murals with the restaurant owner from the clip?
St. Albans. St. Albans and Annesley Park is the subset. No? Oh, the murals in Brooklyn? That is a neighborhood that calls itself, if you want to go there, I'll tell you where to go. Go to Meserole and Waterbury. Meserole Street and Waterbury Street. That's ground zero, okay? Number one, that's what you saw. Number two, the neighborhood is really part of Bushwick, but it is not known that way by its residents. And that brings up an interesting point. It's called East Williamsburg. The reason is, it's for the people who couldn't afford North Williamsburg. But they don't want it to be called Bushwick because this is an agent thing. Like Washington Heights has Hudson Heights. You know, you heard of Soho, right? What does Soho stand for? Great. So what does SOHA stand for? S-O-H-A. What's the matter? No takers? SOHA.
South of Harlem.
You're right. I'll say you're right. You know why I'll say you're right? It really says it's not south of Harlem. South of Harlem will put it below 110th Street. It's SOHA. It's South Harlem. Take out the word of, and it's 100. If you had taken a class with me, I'd give you a 98. Okay, I'm done. Thank you very much.